Everybody seems to be sleeping on this Packers team, including its players, coaches, and the front office. Today, we look at some of the factors that are playing into that and see if the national media has a point.
Yeah, I've been wanting this shit forever. I've been in the field with whatever they throw at me. Brush it off, pick myself up, moving on to the better. Hey. Yeah, ain't no errors, baby. It's a new era. I wake up early, feeling rich like I'm cash.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode, the 100th episode of Sounds Gouda. My name is Jordan Olson, and as always, my best friend and co-host over here, Rob Ralph. So special thank you to anybody who's been listening with us all the way along, whether you caught on in episode 1 or somewhere along the way and became a dedicated and loyal follower. At least we hope you're a dedicated and loyal follower. And if you're new to the show too, welcome in. We hope you enjoy the content. So as always, we're excited to be talking Packers football every Wednesday and Saturday, and we put our content out on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. One other thing before we jump in, we are giving away some Sounds Gouda swag for every 50 new public subscribers that we get. We have to be public so we know where to send the stuff. So at number 600, we're going to do a raffle. We're going to give away a Sounds Gouda hat. So if you have not subscribed, go ahead and do that. Get your name in the raffle, and we will give somebody a hat hopefully pretty soon here. So let's jump into this discussion, Rob. I want to start with just the team ranking and kind of where people are putting the Packers all together. Looking at some Vegas odds here. The Packers, there's a variety of odds, but the Packers are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, ninth, 9th, 10th on this list, depending on what odds you're looking at. And there's a variety of teams. The teams ahead of them, the Eagles, the Ravens, the Bills, the Chiefs, the Lions, Commanders, and then you have a group of Cincinnati, San Francisco, Green Bay, and the Rams that are all in the plus 2,000 odds category, right? And what does that mean for NFC teams? You have the Eagles, the Lions, and Commanders ranked ahead of them, with San Francisco and the Rams kind of right in the same odds. So Rob, what do you make of the Vegas odds right now? And this list and the Packers as an NFC contender based on, what Vegas has them going into the season.
Yeah, I'm not mad about it. That's for sure. Philadelphia obviously getting the best odds. Baltimore is always going to be up there with Lamar. Same with Josh Allen, Buffalo. They're consistently the Chiefs. The Lions just had their best year. We'll see what ends up happening with their coordinators. You got to, man, I don't know. Out of these teams, who do you think is due for a regression on this list is kind of the biggest thing that I try to look for, right? Cincinnati kind of had an off year, right? We don't really know about their defense. They seem to have a holdout with literally everybody that's on that squad. But we know what Burrow and Jamar Chase and company can do, right? They can definitely light it up and they'll have a pretty good offense. I'm a little surprised to see San Francisco up here.
Mm-hmm.
I think that probably means that they're not in turn for regression, but a turn for hey, they're probably going to compete and do a little bit better than people would think this year is kind of what that is telling me. I think Green Bay is right around where probably I thought they would have been. I would have thought LA would have probably had a little bit better odds getting Devontae Adams, Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford can still sling it. Denver's up and coming too with them. They're slightly behind at plus 2,500. I think the Broncos are going to continue to get better, but I don't know. Nothing's too crazy to me. I think maybe Washington is a little high. I think they might be due for a little bit of regression. I think Detroit. I don't think they're going to be 15-2, especially with the gauntlet of the schedule that the NFC North has against all those really good teams. I really hope that somehow we see the Chiefs take a downfall, please. I feel like every year they're always in the Super Bowl, or at least contending in the playoffs. So I don't know. Those are just some of my brief thoughts. I think being behind them, the Chargers make sense. The Buccaneers makes sense. The Minnesota, I think, has probably got the best and most talented roster, just minus their quarterback is their big question mark, like we alluded to. Pittsburgh is making trades all over the place, so you never know, but that feels like a 9-8 season to me. And same thing down here, a little bit sneaky, but The Bears at plus 4,000. I would never, ever, ever put money on it, but to me, it feels like they're due to be a little bit better this year. So I find a lot of really cool and interesting sort of metrics and analysis within this stuff. What do you think about it?
Well, I think that I pull a couple narratives out of this. One, I think that the Packers should be ranked ahead of San Francisco right now with all of the losses that they've had to that team. I mean, there's a massive changing the guard there in San Francisco. And I think that the Vegas odd makers are leaning heavily into Kyle Shanahan, like we put out in our last show, being one of the top three coaches in this league and getting the most out of that roster, right? I still like the Packers' potential, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the potential for them to come back to expectations from last year. And jumping that San Francisco team. I really see the Packers on a similar level as Washington. I don't know that they really, from a talent perspective and, kind of the trajectory of those two teams, I see them pretty equally. So, you kind of after Philadelphia, as tier one, and Detroit maybe a close second. I think they're right there with Washington, the Rams, and the Packers, as the five teams that have a real chance to contend in the NFC. And then just for all the offseason talk about where the Vikings and Bears are going to finish in this division. So if you look at the Vegas odds, they would have this ranked out as, Detroit being the best team, the Packers being the second best team, the Vikings being the third best team, and the Bears, who definitely won the offseason again, finishing fourth in this division. So it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out. Kind of want to switch over, to what really makes that team go, every team go besides the coaches, though, and look into the quarterback position a little bit too. I think that Jordan Love's upcoming season is a hard one for a lot of people to predict. PFF had him ranked 12th on a recent ranking that they put out in their solid starter who needs help category. Some of the quarterbacks ranked ahead of him include Brock Purdy, Geno Smith, Jared Goff, and Justin Herbert, along with all of the cast of characters you would, normally expect: Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, etc. Right? So, and I think that that's pretty closely reflected in the Vegas odds for MVP as well. You have Josh Allen as the favorite, Lamar Jackson behind him, followed by Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, Jayden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, Justin Herbert. And then this is where things get a little surprising for me. You've got Baker Mayfield at plus 3,300, by some groups, CJ Stroud. Actually, this is kind of a weird list because Baker's technically behind. But you got CJ Stroud, who has better odds than Jordan Love. And you got Jordan Love there at plus 2,500. So, Vegas would have him as a top 10 quarterback contender, but PFF has him outside of that list. So what do you make from that? Or, I know we've got some interesting statistics to kind of talk about here, but before we jump into that, or feel free to jump into that, what do you make of that conversation? Is Love right to be ranked as 12th overall by PFF, or do you think he's not getting the credit that he deserves?
Definitely don't think he's getting the credit he deserves. The Packers wide receivers, for as talented as they are, they do have what's called a drop epidemic that happened last year. So just to give you some stats that I found, Reed from the year previous, so not last year, but the year previous, 4.5% to 15.4% drop rate. Wicks, Dontavian Wicks, Mr. All Talented, can do everything, and he is very talented. The year previous, 4.9% to 17% drop rate. Dobbs was the only one who didn't happen, and it wasn't as bad. Dobbs 6.3% to 9.8 drop rate. So Love went from the 18th lowest to the fourth highest drop rate in the NFL. Fourth highest. So for a little bit of context on this too, Love did miss some chunks of 4 games, right? Injuries. But even with perfect hands, his 74.7% adjusted completion percentage ranks just 19th. So meanwhile, Jared Goff had 5 drops, all season last year from his wide receivers. That is a ridiculous stat. Love had 5 drops in the one game versus Detroit alone. So I do think that he's very, very undervalued here. And if his wide receivers can come in, can help him, if Matthew Golden can put in some speed element to this game, that'll open up a lot of other different stuff. And they can even cut this in half. Let's just say, right? Glass half full. You don't have to cut it all. I know you don't have to be perfect, but let's just say you cut it in half. Jordan Love should absolutely, I think, be a top 5 quarterback this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A couple comparisons that I pulled up statistically, I think a lot of people have seen this out there on Twitter, and it was generating some conversation for a while, but compare Jordan Love to Justin Herbert, who's ranked ahead of him on PFF's list. Jordan Love did play 2.5 less games statistically than Justin Herbert, appearing in 15 games though. So looking at some of the key statistics, Justin Herbert had a slightly better completion percentage at 65.9 to Jordan Love's 63.1. He did have more passing yards. Herbert did with 3,870 yards to Jordan Love's 3,389 yards. If you look at their passing TDs, Jordan Love had more passing TDs at 25 to Justin Herbert's 23 passing touchdowns, and that's in 2.5 less games. Interceptions are a big difference here, though. Jordan Love had 11 interceptions to Justin Herbert's 3 interceptions. Another side-by-side comparison to a guy that's ahead of him on PFF's list is Geno Smith. And I'm sorry, it's not Geno Smith on the Seattle Seahawks anymore. He's going to the Las Vegas Raiders. And I have a hard time ranking, a quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders and the talent they have on that roster above Jordan Love. But if you look at last year's statistics again, Geno did play in 17 games, had a much higher completion percentage, 70.4% to Jordan Love's 63.1. Geno Smith had 4,320 passing yards to Jordan Love's 3,389 passing yards. Jordan Love still had more passing touchdowns, though, and 25 passing touchdowns to Geno Smith's 21. And he had less interceptions with 11 interceptions to Geno Smith's 15 interceptions. I kind of did a little bit of math and extrapolated Love's stats out. If you would have played a full 17-game season and didn't miss the 2.5 games, and this is not accounting for him playing hurt for a significant portion of those games, but if you take what he averaged throughout the season and played a full season, he would have ended the year with 3,963 yards, 29 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions. So that would have placed him over Justin Herbert's passing yards, and again, easily best both of them in the passing touchdown category, and is still underneath Geno Smith's interceptions on the season. And then I think, Rob, it's really interesting the point that you make about his drops. There's a significant portion of his completion percentage right there, because every one of those passes that's not caught, like you said, easily sway 8, 9, 10 of those balls back the other direction. And he's probably got just as good as completion percentage, if not better, than Justin Herbert at that point in time. So, you could easily make a case to jump Jordan Love up in the rankings over the two of them, just in some side-by-side rankings. So I agree. I think that Jordan Love is getting slept on and maybe not getting the credit that he deserves. And this will be a little teaser for an episode that we did last year and we plan to do again. But sometime in the next few weeks here, Rob and I will be giving our top 10 quarterback rankings, and we'll tell you where we think that Jordan Love ranks them with the likes of, Jared Goff and Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Geno Smith, and this crew. So, I'm all for the Packers getting slept on in general, because, they can take those articles and those, clippings and whatever, they can post them up in their locker. They can, save those things, save those tweets and those read receipts, and they can come back to fuel that throughout this off season and well into the season at that point in time. So I want to throw it over to just kind of, most of the show is really about the offense. Maybe we'll dive into some of the other positions or the defense in a later episode, but NFL.com, so jump into another source, recently came out with an article that had the Packers ranked eighth in offense. They're projecting them to finish eighth in offense in 2025 behind the Eagles, Broncos, Lions, Commanders, Ravens, Bucks, and Bills, with the Bills being number one on that list. So what do you make of that, Rob? Do you think that that's a fair ranking, or do you believe that the Packers should be getting more respect as a better offense going into this year?
Definitely need some more respect, but also got to come and execute. The ones on here that I would put the Packers ahead of the Broncos, even though the Broncos are definitely ascending, but they got Nix, Sutton, Mims, Vele, sorry for butchering that,
I
Dobbins,
think
and
it's
Ingram.
Bailey.
So I would think that the Packers, at least to me, would be ahead of that. Commanders, they did get Deebo Samuel. They got McLaurin. Obviously, they got Jaden Daniels. So I don't know. That one seems pretty even. I might even put the Packers ahead of that. The Ravens are electric. That's fine. The Bucks, I could see questions. The Bills definitely, I think, are pretty good. Even though to me, like Keenan Allen, Coleman, we'll see what he ends up doing. Shakir, their slot gadget receiver, can do everything. Cook's a pretty good running back, decent, kind of more spread the field type of tight ends, and Knox and Kincaid. But the Bills always seem to have an electric offense, and then the Lions, right? Like they still have all their talented players, so that's more or less of like we'll actually really see what happens when you lose a Ben Johnson, right? Do you turn into the Eagles of what is it, 2022 or 23, and when they lose Jonathan Gannon, they lose Sean Steichen, and then towards the end of that year, they lose 7-8 games and completely collapse, get two really good coordinators, and then go and win the Super Bowl, right? So I would say that there's a couple of these on here that I would probably put the Packers over. But also part of this too, like I was alluding to earlier, comes with execution. Marshawn Lloyd's back. Can he stay healthy? Can they marry the run and the pass game up really good? Distribute out those targets to get some people into some rhythm, your Jayden Reeds, etc. I think
Mm-hmm.
that could definitely, as we've alluded to in the past in previous videos, maybe the Packers offense does a little bit better as a passing attack first, run second complementary type of offense. I think that's how both me and you see it, but I think definitely ahead of a few of these teams on here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find it interesting, like take Josh Allen out of it. Do us as fans, do we really believe that Keenan Coleman, Josh Palmer, Khalil Shakur, James Cook, Knox, and Kincaid, is that a better core of offensive weapons than the Packers have at their disposal? Like I don't really, if you match our group one for one up against that group and take Josh Allen and Jordan Love out of it, I would take the Packers playmakers over that group. Josh Jacobs is phenomenal. I think that, we don't know, you don't know what you have in Keenan Coleman, but I would certainly take Jayden Reed as a number one over him, Dobbs over Palmer. I really like, I think Wicks is potential to produce as well. And just in general, you're telling me the Packers are going to have all those guys return now. You don't have Christian Watson, but you add Matthew Golden, a first round pick. You add Savion Williams, which is going to be an interesting weapon. Marshawn Lloyd, we did an episode about him. We think that he's going to do a lot of exciting things in this offense, and you're hoping that you get all the talent with Luke Musgrave to be healthy on the field. I mean, that's four more significant chess pieces that Matt LaFleur has in this offense. So, I'm not saying that I'm going to jump the Packers all the way up to, number one or number two on this list, but I certainly don't have any reason to believe the Packers will not be a top five offense this coming year, unless obviously there's substantial injury to a few guys. You lose Jordan Love and Josh Jacobs for a significant period of time. That changes the outlook of everything, So, but let's dive deeper into some of these weapons for a few minutes. And I got into an interesting discussion with my father, where he's like, man, nobody gives the Packers guys any respect. Like all these teams, they have, these guys that are ranked really high on these lists that are coming out. And another list that came out with the positional rankings was the wide receiver one. And it's no surprise that Justin Jefferson was number 2 on that list and Amon-Ra St. Brown was number 4. Also not a surprise that none of the Packers are ranked in the top 25. But then, I grew up in La Crosse, which is close to the border, and I think there's a lot of chatter over there that like Jordan Addison is better than any single wide receiver on the Packers roster. So a side-by-side comparison of Jordan Addison to Jayden Reed, if you look at their statistics from last year, Jordan Addison had 63 receptions to Jayden Reed's 55. He had 875 receiving yards to Jayden Reed's 857 receiving yards. Jayden Reed averaged more yards per reception, so 15.6 yards to Jordan Addison's 13.9. And Jordan Addison had 9 receiving touchdowns to Jayden Reed's 6. Big difference maker here, though, is what Jayden Reed can do on the ground for you, though. Jayden Reed had 163 rushing yards to Jordan Addison's 20, add in a rushing touchdown there. Overall total yards, then you take his 163 yards, to Jordan Addison's 20 rushing yards, and Jayden Reed has more all-purpose yards as a weapon in this Packers offense than Jordan Addison does. So, I think that argument is pretty whack. And really, like, the next part of this segment is kind of talking about how the Packers function, because I think that if you went ahead and if Matt LaFleur wanted to focus his offense through 4 key players like the Lions and the Vikings do, and we'll share some statistics there, I think a lot of these receivers and offensive weapons would be getting a lot more respect on their names. So, like, Rob, I don't know if you want to jump in here and talk about any of that, but what are your thoughts related to that conversation?
Yeah, I think Jordan Addison is a solid receiver. I don't think he's better than any of the Packers wide receivers. I'm not sure on Jordan Addison's drop percentage, but that's always the conversation, at least to me, like I've alluded to. But I mean, yeah, that was some of the conversation from last year, is that, do the Packers need an alpha one, a 1-2 punch, or at least an alpha one wide receiver to really make this offense tick? I don't think so. I just think the Packers wide receivers just need to execute. But, if they had more of a distributed and got some of these guys some more targets. So Reed stats, if 150 targets calculation, 1,714 yards, 110 receptions, and 12 TDs. That's similar to what Jefferson got 1,533 yards, 103 receptions, 10 TDs, and St. Brown, 1,263 yards and 115 receptions and 13 TDs. So same thing here with Dobbs, if 100 targets, 750 yards, 58 receptions, 5 TDs. Wicks, 519 yards, 50 receptions, 6 TDs. Kraft at 100 targets, 884 yards, 63 reception, 9 touchdowns. And Jacobs, the same thing. So 428 yards, 45 receptions, and 2 TDs. So for me, I kind of put this back to basketball a little bit. Like, you give me the ball more, yeah, maybe I'm going to miss my first one, nerves, whatever, get into some free throws, miss one here and there. You keep feeding me that rock and I keep shooting it. I really do hope by the 20th time that I'm going to be starting to make some shots. You know what I mean? Like, So I think that's kind of like the narrative or conversation here is like, yeah, Justin Jefferson is a very, very good wide receiver. He's a very good route runner, right? But he's also getting fed the ball repeatedly and these different types of situations and these multiple different types of routes. He's building himself some confidence. So do you think that matters, or do you think, like, if they distribute that to the Packers, if depending on how they would do it, do you think that some of our wide receivers, A, wouldn't have as many drop issues, and B, and get into rhythm better?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, Matt LaFleur doesn't want to run his offense through, like a big 3 or a big 4.
Yeah.
But I think there's certainly the conversation that I think that they would, like, let's just say that, coming out next year, you have, Reed and Dobbs and Wicks as your, 3 starters. And maybe if you want to interchange Golden, I'll make it Reed, Dobbs, and Golden as your primary catchers, right? If Matt LaFleur wasn't focused on trying to mix in Bo Melton and Malik Heath and, worrying about feeding, the fourth and fifth wide receiver on this team and really like leaned into his top three receivers. Really leaned into Tucker Kraft. And I know there's been a lot of conversation recently about Tucker Kraft becoming a bigger part of this offense this coming year. So, I can really see a situation where, Tucker Kraft had 70 targets last year. He could end up averaging like 7, 8 targets a game if Matt LaFleur wanted him to, if they wanted to feature him. And like you said, if you give Kraft 100 targets, that's 884 yards, 63 receptions, and 9 TDs, right? Like, that's pretty impressive statistics from a tight end. If you have a big three of, Reed, Dobbs, and Kraft as your pass catchers, and then work in a Matthew Golden, and let Josh Jacobs do what he's going to do. I think that could be a very, very potent offense, but I just don't know that it's going to shake out like that. I unfortunately kind of think that with the more weapons we have, the less targets that a few of these guys are going to get. I don't know. Do you think that Matt LaFleur will change his ways, Rob, and lean into, a few guys a little bit more, up Jayden Reed's, targets to 100, up Tucker Kraft's targets to 100, and try to let those guys cook?
Man, I don't know. That's a lot. That is a lot of mouths to feed. I mean, Savion Williams too, right? Like your super gadget player you got in the draft this year, Josh Jacobs, Marshawn Lloyd. You know, I don't know. To me, I don't think that that's the issue. I think, to me, in my opinion, right? So this is just my opinion. I think it's an execution issue. I think
Mm-hmm.
as long as they catch the ball, if they play complementary with each other, they continue to run block really good. When pass run block, or excuse me, running situations, your wide receivers continue to run block really good in those spots, and they can open up some other things in the field. More in the intermediate and deep type of the field. I think that this team can do a lot. So in my opinion, I don't think that that's what the Packers need. I understand it does work, but I'm not. I think you're comparing like apples to oranges. It's not apples to apples.
Mm-hmm.
I get how you can see it to be this way because that's typically the way it works. And that's why some of these wide receivers and bigger types of names are getting the contracts that all the big money, right? So I get it, the headlines, fantasy football, that sort of stuff. And people hate that, right? Distribute everywhere for whatever team it is. But I really do feel Packers execute better, have less drops, do all those other things I was talking about. I think that they can be a very efficient offense and not have, an amount of targets that we need to go to a few different types of guys alone.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think the for the sake of this discussion in this show, right, I think is just demonstrating the difference in respect that might come from some of these off-season rankings, right? And if you look at the target share that the guys on these lists are getting, you know, put a Jayden Reed or a Tucker Kraft into one of these, into Lions offense, and Jayden Reed's probably besting Jameson Williams for targets. Maybe not. I mean, he was a heck of a deep threat last year. But Tucker Kraft could easily be getting the same looks that Sam Laporte is getting, or T.J. Hawkinson's getting for the Vikings. The Vikings have proven they want to throw to the tight end. Hawkinson only played in 10 games, but he was on pace for 105 receptions. So I think the point that I'm trying to make of all of this is, don't sleep on the Packers players' ability by just looking at the statistics in these rankings, because I think in other situations and other teams, if you were to put them in those situations, that their numbers would speak a lot louder for them in that situation. So not saying we have to only filter through 4 guys, but just really making the argument that if that's how we wanted things to shake out, I certainly think the cream would rise to the top, and you'd see a couple of these guys have some more all-pro like seasons. One other thing I wanted to point out before we get into a little coaching discussion is that look at a team like the Lions, and this factors into the target share. It factors into statistics, some of the things we were talking about with Jordan Love and passing yards and, receivers, completions, and targets. The Lions converted on 47.6% of third downs. The Packers last year only converted on 39.5% of third downs. And that comes right back to your point, Rob, about executing, drops, things like that. Over the course of the season, that's probably an extra, drive a game. If you talk about one of those early drives that kind of fizzles out after 4 or 5 plays, you go 4 and out, you extend a couple of those drives, and all of a sudden you're talking about having another 100 targets throughout the season to distribute to these players, which obviously is going to extrapolate into higher statistics for these players. Jordan Love, the wide receivers, the tight ends, everybody. So if they can execute, if they can get that completion percentage on third down, which is the most critical down in football, up to, that 45, 46%, the rate that the Chiefs, the Lions, the Commanders are executing at, I think we're going to see some higher statistics from all of these offensive players. And then this is kind of a follow-up from our previous show that came out about our coaching rankings, but PFF recently came out with their list of top 10 coaches. And much to the dismay of Packers fans, Matt LaFleur was not in their top 10. So the guys that make up their list were Andy Reid, Sean Payton, Sean McVay, John Harbaugh, Mike Tomlin, Jim Harbaugh, Kyle Shanahan, Nick Sirianni, Dan Campbell, and Kevin Stefanski. So those were their top 10. From our list, that excludes Matt LaFleur, Sean McDermott, and Kevin O'Connell. So what do you make of the difference between PFF's list and our list? And what are some things that stand out to you?
How in the world did Kevin Stefanski make that list? That is one glaring name. Is it just because he's lasted this long through all the bad organizational drama and trauma, D and the T, that he's been through, and he's been able to like survive himself? I don't understand that one. Tomlin, I could see, right? He won a Super Bowl, even though it was about 500 decades ago. He is long tenured. He is a very, very good coach. So he was in our honorable mentions. Like, that one totally makes sense. Sean Payton, I get it. I can understand that one. I really can. But the one to me, it's like Kevin Stefanski. Like, I don't know. Matt LaFleur, I believe, should be in there. Obviously, you can go and check out our video on that. Sean McDermott has had a lot of consistent success. Hasn't won the chip yet, but I think that he definitely will here at some point. And then we'll see how it goes this year with the Vikings. But how Kevin O'Connell is not on that list. And I hate, so does Jordan, hate the Minnesota Vikings. So it really pains me to say this, but Kevin O'Connell has to be on that list, man. Especially if he does it again, then he's definitely cemented on that list. But Kevin Stefanski should not be on that list.
I mean, and just to put some statistics behind that, right? Kevin Stefanski is 40-44 in the regular season in his 5 years. He's had 2 winning seasons. He had a winning season in 2020 when he was 11-5, and a winning season in 2023 when he was 11-6. He has only won 1 playoff game in that 5-year stretch. So, I mean, to have him on the list over Matt LaFleur, McDermott, and Kevin O'Connell, I think is absolutely ridiculous. He is a 2-time, coach of the year. I think both of those times were those 2 11-win seasons, and a lot of that was based on the Browns' expectations going into those seasons. But I can't do it. I can't put Stefanski on that list.
Is this really a Brown super fan that wrote this list?
Some other interesting points, and then we'll get you all out of here. This ended up being a little longer episode, but lots of good stuff for us to talk about. Dan Campbell is in kind of a similar spot to where we ranked him. I'm guessing that PFF expects the loss of his 2 very talented assistants to show this year. And they're not taking anything away from Dan Campbell. He is an excellent motivator of men, and I would love to play for Dan Campbell. He seems like a really cool and genuine dude to play for, and he's changed the whole culture of that entire team. But I think PFF sees that similarly to the way that we see it. PFF had John Harbaugh ranked a lot higher, and Rob and I struggled with that one too, because we think John Harbaugh's been the picture of consistent success. We just see a lot of talented guys ahead of him on this list as well. Mike Tomlin makes the list as well. And he's a great coach too. I mean, the players speak over and over again about how much they love playing for Mike Tomlin, how great of a coach that he is. The Steelers are just kind of in limbo, though. They haven't won many playoff games recently. They haven't been to a championship game in a long time. And they haven't had a great quarterback. So you kind of got to give Tomlin credit where credit's due for having as many winning seasons as he's been able to put together. So we could have a whole nother show on comparing PFF's list to ours and any other list you want to insert in there. But this conversation will continue, and we'll see how it plays out this upcoming season.
So Packers fans, let us know what you think. Any of the conversation with the NFL coaches, the lists, the wide receivers, the comparisons, the target shares, the drop conversation, the Jordan Love quarterback listing too of it all. Let us know what you think down below in the comments. We love engaging with you guys. Just know that we do have new content every Wednesday and Saturday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. So please make sure to like, sub, and follow us as you are able. Thanks for listening, right? Just first and foremost, share it with your friends and family members and other Packer fans as well. And that's all that we have for you. Just know that Jordan and I are on socials too as well. Real quick, I am at Sounds Gouda with 3 A's, and Jordan is at Olsen Jord. But that is it. We hope that you have a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good night. Take care. Go Pack Go.
Been wanting this shit forever. I've been in the field with whatever they throw at me. Brush it off, pick myself up, moving on to the better.